Nyanamoli's only way to jhana. Being watchful of your actions throughout the day means that your mind is staying with that which is the priority, namely the guarding of the gateway of your mind, so that there are no obstructions for it. That's the sole task, which can be outlined through discipline, guarding the senses and moderating your eating. The gateway is that one entrance into the city, which is walled all around, and that wall is your discipline and sense restraint. That's why virtue and celibacy are not optional if you want to practice rightly. The problem of still being addicted to the pleasures of the senses, although you know they are doing you more harm than good, is that you are not seeing the nature of where that pleasure begins. You are only seeing what you are used to seeing, that which is on the level of sense objects. There is something more to that picture which is being left out, because of which your addiction is not uprooted, namely, the relationship between you and your body. The relationship between you and your body is what must not be left out of the picture. Whenever there is a sensual pull towards sense objects for pleasure, your body and senses are there peripherally, concurrently enduring, as a basis from which you are pressured. The relationship on that peripheral, concurrent level between you and that body that is pressuring you towards sense objects, that's what needs to be understood. The reason why that is so hard to understand is because the body, as a unity of sense organs, does not and cannot appear on the level of sense objects. Your dependence on the pleasures of the sense objects is determined by and dependent upon the pressure that your body exerts on your mind. It's about taming that which pressures you, because of which you are not free. That is why you are still attracted to sense objects despite knowing how little satisfaction sense objects provide. Your knowledge that this is unsatisfactory is limited and pertains only to the domain of sense objects. You are failing to see the bigger picture, which involves this whole underlying pressure of your own body and the pleasure that you depend on, the wild animal underneath. You don't see that as a problem because you think that the sense objects that obsess you are the problem. No, that is rather the end result of the problem, which is already there and fully controlling you. The root of the problem is that the body, that is to say the senses, is attracted to the pleasure that the senses are used to, which are the unwholesome pleasures that you have been carelessly feeding to them. Failing to discern the senses and being on the level of sense objects, that is how you are underlain by all the asavas, sensuality, being, and views. They underlie you because you go over them, and they direct and push you. So you want to develop your mind to the extent necessary, whereby you are not underlain by them, but where you underlie them, so to speak. when one knows and sees the eye as not self, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind as not self, the underlying tendencies are uprooted. When one knows and sees forms as not self, smells, tastes, touches, thoughts as not self, the underlying tendencies are uprooted. Lacking desire for sensuality is wonderful, because it's extremely practical, just like other simple things such as wearing patched robes. Because you don't worry about it, it serves the purpose, it's lightweight and easy to maintain, you don't have to do anything difficult to procure it, and nobody wants it or would steal it. So it's wonderful because it doesn't burden you with duty, and it's easy. And that is a pleasure that is not sensuality. The pleasure of generosity is similar. That is what the Buddha would teach householders before telling them about the right view. He would elevate and gladden their mind with a talk on generosity and higher births. So he was teaching them about good types of pleasure, helping others feel pleasant, and even if you're not doing it for the purest reasons, it is still not a pleasure that will provoke lust and fever. Thus it benefits the mind. So what's the danger then? Is the danger that there are hooks around? Or is the danger in the fact that you can't stop grabbing them? Because suppose a fisherman would cast a baited hook into a deep lake, and a fish on the lookout for food would swallow it. That fish who has thus swallowed the fisherman's hook would meet with calamity and disaster, and the fisherman could do with it as he wishes. So too, bhikkhus, there are these 6 hooks in the world for the calamity of beings, for the slaughter of living beings. There are, bhikkhus, forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, and agreeable, provocative of lust. If a bhikkhu seeks delight in them, remains holding to them, he is called a bhikkhu who has swallowed Mara's hook. He is met with calamity and disaster, and the evil one can do with him as he wishes. There are, bhikkhus, sounds cognizable by the ear, thoughts cognizable by the mind, that are desirable and tantalizing, smells, tastes, touches. If a bhikkhu seeks delight in them, the evil one can do with him as he wishes, and he will meet with calamity. So stop reaching for the hooks, and take responsibility first for when you do reach for them. Then, if you continue to stop reaching, you can calm down and see that freedom for yourself. People don't realize that their mind has a mind of its own. Your sense of ownership doesn't matter. The truth is that the mind is basically on its own while you are subjected to it. That's the recognition of seeing the sign of the mind as something that is not yours, that you are paired with. Delusion is not missing a piece of information. It's an existential attitude that you have towards your senses. That's why I often refer to it as distraction, because it's an active thing. It's something that you are doing here and now. Just like lust and aversion, delusion is something you welcome, act upon, accept and do not understand. It's not something you don't know. It's the attitude of distraction. It's about the movement of distraction, the movement of having something to do to maintain your being. A good indicator to measure it would be your capacity for boredom. If you are easily bored, that means you have accumulated a lot of delusion that will be difficult to see, and it will not fade easily. If you never get bored, where there is no pressure whatsoever of non-activity, no pressure to do anything, no pressure to get rid of anything or to distract yourself or look away from nothing happening or nothing being felt, then you are at least an anagami or an arahant. Practically speaking, boredom is a good way to practice. People don't see boredom as an indicator, and certainly don't see delusion as an attitude that they cultivate. Don't even do your meditation technique. Then it doesn't matter whether you sit, walk, stand, or lay down. Just abide in that non-activity. The mind will certainly be presenting you with something to do, which is fine. You don't need to try to get rid of those thoughts. You just don't act upon them. If you decide to get up or go to the toilet, those are not the kinds of activities that will distract you. But if your mind suggests, let me just check my email, well, that's an activity of a kind that will distract you, so you don't do that. Now, if you do that for an hour, you will probably feel intense boredom, and may even feel frightened, which is why people fear solitude and confinement, where there is nothing to distract their senses. But in itself it is only frightening because you have always depended upon the momentum of action. That's a gratuitous dependency that you have been cultivating because you didn't know any better. And as long as you don't know any better, you will be cultivating it. Just try abiding in non-activity. No meditation techniques or trying to be mindful. Just sit there. Don't fall asleep. Get up or walk back and forth if you feel sleepy. And just allow your mind to come up with ideas and things to do, and then don't commit to them. Let those thoughts endure, and just sit about. Do that for a few hours and you will see that there is going to be a space created between you and your senses because of that identification that people naturally jump into. When I wants to see equals I want to see. That identification, that proximity with the senses needs maintenance. If you keep the precepts, dwell in solitude, and don't act upon impulse, and create that space, then you will get to see this sense creature for what it is. The mind there with its thoughts wanting to do this and that, the monkey mind. You get to see it because you stop being driven by it. Now suppose this is your practice for most of the day, abiding in non-activity, wakeful and discerning the mind. Then, when you commit to do something with body, speech or mind, you do so only on the level of that recognition that it will not cause further distraction. You do those activities with jhana, the mind of non-activity, non-distraction. That's why in jhana you can walk, eat, go to the toilet. It's not like you're frozen motionless. Non-activity means no activity that is rooted in distraction or lust or aversion. It will also then become clear what you are not distracting yourself from, which is yourself, the sixth-sensed creature, the pressure. That's why people fear boredom, and why it always turns into existential anxiety, because you start seeing how divorced you are from your own senses, from the things that you identify with, things that define who or what you are. It's as if someone released a balloon, which floats away higher and higher. That's your mind. There is no end to how high it can go, and there is no problem in how high it goes either. The problem arises from your expectation, need, and dependence of being tethered to the senses, and that in turn is so because you haven't been restraining yourself enough. You haven't been seeing the danger in the slightest fault, and you have been depending on action through your senses. Everybody depends on having something to do, but some depend on it more than others. When a person constantly needs to be active, as soon as they are not active, they immediately get bored, restless, and then anxiety sets in. And then, no matter how insignificant something is, it becomes the most important thing that must be done. That anxiety and desperation is only there because they refuse to give up the gratuitous assumption that the senses belong to them and are worth holding to. If you give that up, then non-activity is the most sublime thing. But as I said, the pleasure of the first comprehension and the pleasure of the neutral feeling needs to be understood and developed. It's not automatic. That's why from that perspective, even enduring discomfort will feel like divine pleasure. From the point of view of jhana, physical endurance, eating rough food, living at the root of a tree, wearing rough robes, using harsh medicines will all feel like they are the finest requisites. It's the same principle, determined by the extent to which your mind is withdrawn, that determines how pleasantly the engagement will be experienced. It is the same principle in which certain people who engage in as much sensuality as they want end up feeling depressed and numb to it. It is because they have been engaging with that level for so long, and their minds have not been withdrawn. So it's the same principle of withdrawal. In boredom, if you work through it, don't act out of it, and even endure anxiety if it arises, then even chores will be felt as agreeable. Now, if you develop that further into a jhana, then even if you don't do any chores, just enduring the elements will be agreeable. It will be felt pleasant from the point of view of this creature being so withdrawn. All you need to do for relaxation is not do any work, not perform any duty. You can easily relax by doing nothing, or doing something wholesome and non-distracting that does not result in you wanting to do more of and losing sight of yourself. You do want to relax, but not to the point where you lose sight of the creature that you need to keep an eye on. You can relax, but at no point does that mean that you should lose sight of the sixth-sensed creature. That's the difference between activity and non-activity. If you don't lose sight of the creature, you will not be acting on the level of the creature, even if you are doing chores. You will be doing them through the mind of non-activity. That is, only to the minimal point of need and fulfilling a purpose. It's the same with eating. You do it to the extent that you need it. And eating more than you need is no longer seen as pleasant. Because what is pleasurable is protecting the mind of non-distraction, which makes everything else pleasurable from a higher stance. You realize that this is the true pleasure which is not underlined by craving for more, the type of pleasure that is not unwholesome. It's safe, and you are mindful within it. It's win-win.